tutorial, we're going to be talking about notifications, so how we can get notifications to display on a watch, as well as the different types of notifications we can use. So the way that notifications work is basically the phone or the Apple Watch decides when it's appropriate to show a notification and then what to do with the notification once it's showing it on the watch. There's a couple different types. The one we're going to be focusing on mostly is a long notification. In other words, maybe the user gets some kind of haptic feedback, looks at their watch, notices that there's a notification. If they keep looking at it, that's known as a long notification. Short one is, you look at it and then you put your wrist down and then the notification will kind of go away. But we're going to be mostly concerned with long notifications here. So as you can see here, I'm just on my standard kind of interface storyboard here. And previously we haven't really looked down here at the static and dynamic interfaces before. So these are where you can kind of adjust your notifications. And if you don't have these down here, you may just not have ticked off notifications when you set up the project. So for example, if we do new project, we do an iOS app with WatchKit app, you have to make sure you include the notification scene down here. Otherwise, you won't have those interfaces down below to kind of play around with. So the first thing to kind of look at is how we can actually see what our notification looks like. And so there is some built-in notification behavior right off the bat. So because we indicated we wanted to have notifications, it automatically, under supporting files down here, created this push notifications payload.apns. And APNS is the Apple Push Notification Service. So if you take a look at this, it kind of looks like JSON if you're familiar with JSON, right? Basically, it's a bunch of strings with some key and value pairs. And so essentially, this is what it's going to display at first, right? So you can alter this if you want to. For example, this will be the test message. This will be the optional title as it's kind of loading in the notification. And then you can add some custom stuff in here as well. So right off the bat, if we just wanted to see this notification, what this would look like on a phone, or not on a phone, on a watch, we can easily do that. And we just need to make sure we set up our simulator correctly. So you may have it set to notification to the actual app itself. And just to show you again, so my app itself doesn't have anything on it. So if you try to go to the app, it's just going to be a blank screen with the time in the upper right. But if we want to see what our notification looks like, we just have to make sure we select the notification option down below. So this one up here would show the actual phone app. This one would show the WatchKit app. And this one would show the notification. So let's see. We'll just go again with the 7 Plus the Apple Watch Series 2. And if you want to just see the default static interface, what that looks like, you can easily do that. So let's just do that in our simulator here. Okay, so it didn't have anything to build, so I would hope that build succeeded. Okay, so it's just going to load into it in a second here once it actually compiles it and loads it into the simulator. And then we'll see what it would look like to do a long look. So there you might have missed it, but it just did a quick pan up, and it basically just quickly showed the optional title. And now we see it's showing us test message, and it just has some default, first button and dismiss behavior. And up here, WK notification, that's the name of our app. So if you're considering you're using a different app on your watch, for example, you get a notification, you're going to want to know what app it's coming from, right? And I just named this one WK notifications. We can change that, and we'll see how to change that in a bit. But for now, we can kind of alter this if we want to. So change the test message, for example, hello there. And we'll change the optional title, for example, new title. And really, you just have to kind of alter this push notification payload.apns file for, to alter this simple behavior. It does have some default stuff in here as well. So it has a button. Button didn't really do anything. It's going to load into our app, of which we don't have anything. But if we go back home and we relaunch it, and we'll just keep an eye on it, we'll see if we can spot our new title and body here. And this is one way we can easily adjust the content of our notification. Right? Pretty straightforward. Okay, new title, there we go. We did a long look, and then it went into the actual notification. And now we see that it altered it there. Right? And we can dismiss this, and it goes back to what we were looking at before. Pretty straightforward, right? So that's pretty simple. In terms of customizing the appearance, it's also pretty straightforward. So just take a look at static interfaces first. We'll take a look at dynamic interfaces later on. But just for static interface, nothing Nothing too complex. So they're pretty simple, and it's basically, meant to be pretty straightforward. It gives you kind of an alert message. You can have some kind of background image if you want. You can change the theme. And so that's kind of like editing any other object that we've been doing before on an interface controller. So instead, if we select our static interface here, and we can see we have our attributes inspector over on the right. If we don't have a dynamic interface, we can remove it, but I do want to have one for later. But here you can put in a background, you can change the mode, you can change the color. There's all sorts of things you can do, really. So if we pop out our little side panel here on the left, so we can select specific parts of our notification as well. All right, so we can see it's a static notification interface controller. And so from here, if we wanted to change the color, that's pretty straightforward. So let me just grab it here in color. You can use the color wheel. You can make it look pretty neat. I kind of like the normal, just the default design, but for now, let's just kind of do this red kind of color. This image here, you may notice this is just kind of the default image. So if you don't have an image for your app, it just kind of shows this default image. So if you were publishing, for example, to the App Store, you definitely want to have an image. For the purpose of this demo, I don't have one. And you would do that in your WatchKit app assets.exe assets file. So there's a section here for app icon. So it needs a whole bunch of different icons for all the different screen sizes, and it has to match these dimensions. So in case you were wondering, that's why it's not showing an image. But back to our storyboard. Right, so you can alter that. Other things, you could take a look at the category itself. So I'm looking at my category, and you can see you can change the sash color, which is the upper color. So it is sort of limited in terms of what you can adjust, but what you can, it's pretty good. And then title color, obviously this one would be the title. Right, so let's just go with some kind of crazy combination of colors here. Wants sash blur. It's kind of hard to tell, but this would basically add a blur effect over the background. So we could put a background image in here actually for our notification. So let's go ahead and do that. So I have some media files here, and if I just choose one at random, let's say we wanted this heart to be the background image. So if I add that to my assets library, bring that in like so. Okay, and let's see, we'll render it as a template image. And then in our interface storyboard, okay, and now we can add an image in the background behind our actual notification here if we wanted to. So we can say background heart, for example, and it's kind of hard to see, but it is kind of scaling it. And if I shift my category here and I just give it 0 for opacity, you can see the heart there in the background. But let's go ahead and let's grab the notification itself. We'll do aspect fill. Aspect fit is what I wanted. And it kind of shrinks it down. Color, let's just adjust the color here. Let me make it non-opaque. Right, so now we just have kind of a clear notification with a heart image in the background. Color looks a little weird, so let's just do some kind of maybe white. Yeah, and again, this is the name of our app. That's one way we can do in background. Otherwise, this is just another interface, so we could add objects. One caveat, you can't add interactive objects because this is not meant to be interactive. So for example, if you try to add a button, it probably won't work, but if you try to do something like an image, right, this should be just fine. And let's see, image. You could do an image in this way as well. Right, so now we have another image. So let me get rid of that. But just a different way of doing it. Other things, we can adjust this alert label. So if you needed something to be multiple lines, so I need multiple lines. Right, it's kind of like any other label object. So you can adjust the min scale. In fact, it is just a label object, right? So you can say lines, add lines. You can say 0, so it always just wraps around to however many lines you need. And you can see it's kind of fitting the heart in the background with the aspect ratio it needs. So let's try to take a look at this in the simulator and see what it looks like. Before that, I'm just going to make sure that I disable this section that says has dynamic interface. And I'm doing that because if you notice this little exclamation mark up here, it doesn't like that I haven't configured my dynamic interface yet. And the way these notifications work basically is it always tries to load the dynamic interface first. And if this fails for whatever reason, it'll just load the static notification instead, which is the one we've been working on. So static notification should be pretty straightforward, pretty stripped down. The dynamic one can be a bit more complicated. But for now, I'm just going to disable it just so that we can take a look and see what our static interface looks like at first. So let's try to compile this and launch it and see what it looks like. So we'll do one of these. Should compile okay. Build succeeded. No more yellow exclamation point. And let's make sure it launches and we'll take a look at it. And so it should have the content not here, but yeah, okay, interesting. So it gave it the pink kind of title color or header color. It has our heart in the background, which is what we wanted. And otherwise, this would span multiple lines if it needed to, but we define the content actually in here. So the body, the title was in the quick glance that kind of scrolls by quickly. And yeah, so that's how we can do some simple customization on our notification. Next, if we wanted to take a look at dynamic interfaces, we just need to understand how they are coded up essentially. So, if I add has dynamic interface, it adds this dynamic interface back. And the controller for this interface, it's done in the notification controller.swift file. And if we take a quick look here, we can see that there's an override func did receive. And it's telling us here basically this is the method that's called if a notification needs to be presented, and this is the one used for dynamic notifications. So essentially, we need to tell the notification here what class it belongs to. So we would do that here in class. And if I do that, it would look something like this. And now we can kind of dynamically or change it, and this will be our dynamic notification. If this one fails to load, it's just going to go ahead and load the static notification instead. Now, because I've kind of been switching this on and off, so here when I go this, turn it on and off, that makes it act a little bit buggy in my experience. So now if I try to tell it, hey, you belong to the class notification controller, it for some reason sometimes fails to find this notification controller. So as a workaround, I'm just going to kind of create a new project file and start fresh. So let me just open that up actually. New, no, not new, open recent. And let's see here, notification test is the one that I just created. Notification text, test.xcode project. And so if I zoom in here, so here I've never checked off remove or add. So by default, I just left it on has dynamic interface. Now if I look at dynamic interface, it just kind of has by default the notification controller. So, it can get kind of buggy, so I'm not going to tinker around with that too much. But now we can kind of add different stuff on our dynamic notification versus our static notification. And if we look at my notification controller, I've uncommented this part. So basically, as it says here, use this if you have a dynamic notification interface, and it just calls a completion handler on it. So if we take a look at notification interface controller, command click, here, if you're ever curious, you can kind of take a look here to see some built-in methods. And that's how you can do that. So, if we do different notification styles, we'll be able to tell here. So this one, all it has is a label. And if we edit the, let's see here, the push notifications payload, we can edit that stuff here. So we can say, I'm a static notification with an unhappy face, maybe. Doesn't like being static. And then in our dynamic one, we can do different stuff as well. So it's still not meant to be interactive. So you shouldn't have something like a picker or a button that has, dynamic action with it. But we can do labels, for example. So label, we can do a couple labels. Hey, let's do another one here. let's see. Whoops, I accidentally deleted it. We'll add another one. Right, so let's try to load this up and we'll see if it does successfully load our dynamic notification or our static one. So let's make sure I have it set up. Yep, set up to show a notification. Play here. Build succeeded. That's good. And so this by default should just go to the notification controller. I've uncommented out that section of code, so it should allow the dynamic notification to load. And let's make sure it does. Hey, there we go. So it loaded our dynamic notification instead, which is great. And again, if this one fails to load for whatever reason, it would just load up the static notification instead. And we didn't really give it any behavior, right? We just kind of defined some labels. But, you know, if you click on it, it takes you into your app. Our app, of course, doesn't have anything on it, but that's how we can go into our app. Pretty neat, right? Now, we can treat this as any other interface. So we can have all sorts of outlets, but as Apple recommends, avoid using things like buttons, switches, or other types of interactive controls. What we want is things like, you know, labels, images, groups, tables and maps. We could do, probably not the super best idea because it's pretty limited in terms of real estate and the amount of stuff you can convey in a notification, but it is possible. I mean, heck, you could even do some kind of inline movie playing as a notification as well. It'd be kind of interesting. But again, it's not meant to be interactive, so you can't really do actions, but you could do outlets. So let's take a look at doing that. So with our focus here on our dynamic, we will open up our assistant editor. And as you can see here, I am in the notification controller.swift, not the interface controller. This is the notification controller. So in our did receive notification, here we can kind of configure our outlets. So we should do something pretty quick. We don't want it to take too long, but let's grab our labels here. So this one is label, let's bring it over here. And you can see you can name it. It's just like any other outlet. So let's say top label for this one. This one can be middle label. Let me put it right underneath. Middle label. Okay, and I'll make a space here for the last one. And bring it over. Oops, I hit the wrong key. Control click. Bottom label. Okay, so now these are outlets that we can manipulate, right? It just assigns them to variables. So down here, when did receive notification, here we can populate, as it says here, our dynamic notification. So if we just grab our variable names, so top label dot, and then we can just kind of call the methods available on the label object. I'm top label. Next one is, I think I called it middle label. Dot set text. I'm in the middle. And bottom label. Dot set text. Too many brackets. I'm on the bottom. Okay, so this should be pretty quick, shouldn't take too long, and then it's going to call completion handler, as it says here. After populating your dynamic notification interface, call the completion block. So let's test it out. And let's see, we'll go into the attributes inspector as well. And let's allow these to wrap if they need to. So lines, I'll just set each of them to take up 0 lines. That way they'll always wrap around to however many lines they need. And I'm not going to set any text explicitly. Actually, I do want to see it in my builder. So I'll leave it as is, and this will just get overwritten with our configuration stuff here. So we'll stop and we'll run it again. And fingers crossed, this will load our dynamic notification. And as you can see, we just configure it as if it was any other type of interface, including, how you get your data would also be similar, no matter what kind of interface you're building. All right, so there we go. So we've configured it, and if we tap on it, it'll take us into the app. Otherwise, we still have our first button that was defined here in our simulator actions. But yeah, so we have a pretty straightforward, simple, dynamic notification, and it's working as intended. quick note as well, if you did want to always display the static notification for some reason, that's pretty straightforward to do as well. So you can still configure your dynamic one, but then instead of calling your custom completion handler, you would just call default. Right? And this would allow you to load, as I have here, just the default notification. Right? And as usual, we can always take a look here, WK user notification interface type, and default or custom are the two things that it would accept here. But you know what? We made a dynamic notification for a reason, so I'm going to put it back to custom. And make sure you do have something in your static interface, because it falls back to this again if it fails to load the dynamic one.